Elden Ring is a tough game, and that's an understatement. Elden Ring is one of the hardest games I've ever played, and that's why I decided to create the Beginner's Guide to Elden Ring. This Elden Ring Beginner's Guide is meant to take you from a complete newbie who knows nothing about the game to someone with 10 to 20 hours of experience. If you're here with 30 plus hours in Elden Ring, this guide probably isn't for you. You're just participating in a time-wasting activity, and while I do appreciate the click and the retention, you might want to leave right now unless you want to critique. In that case, critiques are welcome down below in the comments, and if you're really good, I'm probably going to pin it so that other people can read it and figure out where I went wrong. And one last caveat before we get into all this, there are no spoilers in this guide. I'm not going to show you the ending. I'm not going to tell you that Frodo does appear, Bilbo Baggins shoves a ring where the sun doesn't shine and then runs off to Mordor. I'm not going to tell you any of that because I don't want to spoil the ending for you. Anyways, let's get into it. Jump into this guide by talking about builds, and specifically what build is best for you. It's really going to depend on your playstyle and what sort of experience you want with Elden Ring. One thing to keep in mind though is that you can skill up anything at any time, so you're not sort of married to whatever build you pick. In addition to that, you can go out and explore the world and progress through the game at any pace you want. So if at some point you come across a boss that's too hard, it's easy enough to just mark that on the map and come back later. But circling back to builds, there's basically three main things in my opinion that a beginner should really focus on. You're either going to be going with a melee build, you're going to be going with a range sort of weapons build, or you're going to be going with a sorcery build. Now before picking your build, you've got to understand that Elden Rings, a lot of the attacks, a lot of the whole combat system, it's about dodging, rolling, and sort of blocking the attacks that you can block. You can't block every attack, so what it's going to come down to if you pick something like a melee build is getting the timing down. You're going to need to roll at the right time, dodge at the right time, block at the right time, and with smaller mobs, this might not be an issue, but with bosses, it's definitely going to be a bit of a chore. The nice thing though about melee is that it does use stamina, which is something that can be regenerated. Also, ranged does use stamina too if you're using a ranged weapon, but generally when people use a ranged weapon, the way you're going to use this is you use your ranged weapon to pull mobs or pull bosses or pull whatever you're trying to pull, and then you fight them with more of a melee build. You're generally not going to be just doing a pure ranged build, although there are some people that have created some really amazing builds out there for you to look at a later date. If you're just a beginner, I'd focus on either melee or sorcery. The reason I say sorcery is because sorcery is one of those builds that you can really do a ton of damage fairly easily. You're going to be leveling up something like your intelligence along with a few sort of peripheral skills. You can just blast mobs or bosses or enemies away without any issue, but the drawback to a sorcery build is that it does use FP. I think that stands for focus points, and what those do is they don't actually regenerate. So you're going to need to use potions to regenerate the FP, and potions are limited. The way potions work, or the way health potions or sort of focus potions work, is that they regenerate every time you rest, but for that time that you're up, you only have a set amount of potions you can use. So if you're fighting a boss, you might only have 3 potions of each that you can use, which means you only get a set number of attacks that you can use if you're a sorcery build. But if you're more of a melee focused build, all you've got to do is back off, regen your stamina, and go right back in. But the trade-off here is a sorcery build can keep their distance. The attacks are going to be easier to dodge because they're coming from longer ways, and it's just going to be an easier build if you're someone who likes a slower playstyle that doesn't involve as much jumping, dodging, rolling, and blocking. It's still going to be difficult because this is Elden Ring after all. This is a Dark Souls style game, but it's not as difficult as a melee build comes when it comes to dodging and everything like that. Sorcery, it generally comes down to, do you have the right spells? Are they doing enough damage? And can you keep your distance and dodge the attacks that do come your way? So those are the builds, and that's really up to you to pick. Like I said before, if you're a melee build, you're still going to want some sort of ranged weapon so you can shoot and pull mobs or pull enemies to you, especially when they're in a group, because this is the way it works. When you shoot an enemy, it won't alert other enemies nearby. So you shoot an enemy, they come over to you, you attack them, you shoot the next enemy, you just sort of draw them in. Also, when it comes to Elden Rings, one of the things that you shouldn't shy away from is just getting the advantage on a boss or getting the advantage on an enemy by using everything to your advantage. For instance, in this case here, I was fighting a troll. I realized I could go into sort of a castle-like area, and the troll wouldn't be able to attack me, but I could attack the troll with my sorcery build. You might call that cheating, but I call that using the environment to your advantage, and I think that's a big part of any Souls game. So while we're talking about combat, let's just get into melee combat and how that works. So when it comes to melee combat, you've got a few options. You can two-hand a weapon, you can hold a weapon and a shield, or you can basically dual-wield a weapon. There's really no rules around how you should be using weapons or anything like that, but personally for me, I found it a lot easier to just use a weapon and a shield. The shield you can use to block or parry an attack. When you block an attack, you're basically just holding the shield up in front of you. You're going to be using that auto aim button to sort of aim at the enemy who's most likely to attack you, and you're going to basically block their attacks by default. If there's another enemy that's coming in from the other side, you're going to have to focus your attention on that enemy to block that enemy's hits. Otherwise, they're going to be able to get around behind you and, well, do some bad damage. Here's a breakdown of how all of that works when it comes to melee. If you're sneaking and you sneak up on an enemy, especially from behind, you're going to be doing extra damage. When it comes to doing damage to an enemy, you're going to basically have two attacks that you can use. You can use a sort of long attack that's going to take a little bit longer to do, but it's going to do more damage, or you can use a fast attack. When you're sneaking up on the enemy, it works the same way. If you do your fast attack, it's going to do less damage. If you push down and hold that button for the long attack, it's going to do a lot more damage. You're generally going to get that nice little backstab in there, which is always good because a backstab does a lot of damage, and it's great unless it's happening to you. So that's how it works. You want to sneak up on enemies, get the advantage on them, get the jump on them. It works the same with ranged or sorcery. If you get that attack off and the enemy hasn't seen you yet, it's going to do extra damage. When it comes to actually fighting the enemy and they actually know you exist, things get a little bit harder. Again, you can block that attack by just holding the block button, but every time you block an attack, it does drain your stamina. Once your stamina is drained by too much, you're either going to get sort of staggered or the attack's just going to go right through and cut you up. So you don't want to be using block too much. Parry you can use if you get the timing down absolutely right. I've got a video on how to parry. It's got over 100,000 views, so it's obviously a skill that's almost impossible for people to master. I haven't done it myself, but you wait until that enemy's about halfway through their swing. You generally hit the parry button. You're going to be able to block it. They're going to be staggered, and now you can do extra damage by using a few quick attacks or just one long attack. It's really up to you, the enemy, how long they're staggered for, what sort of HP they've got left, and everything like that. Don't go too hard on an enemy, though, because if you do, they're generally going to take advantage of it, and they're going to stab you. So if you're both doing damage to each other, it's generally not good because you probably have more enemies to fight after you kill this big bad baddie. So we've gone over how the shield and sword, or shield and axe, or shield and whatever melee weapon you've picked works. If you're two-handing a weapon, it sort of works the same way, except blocking is going to take less damage. So what happens, you've got a block that can take 100% of the damage, and then you've got blocks that can take only a portion of the damage. It's going to take a lot less of the damage if you're using a two-handed weapon. So if you're using two hands, you're probably going to be doing more of that rolling sort of mechanics, and then you're going to be using the two-handed weapon to do extra damage when you attack. Same with dual wielding, except you got two weapons. You can do fast attacks with both of them. It definitely looks a lot cooler, but my recommendation if you're new is to use a shield in one hand and your melee weapon in the other. This is generally the way I go about it. Also, I did mention this earlier, but do know that you can actually auto-target enemies. This is different keys on different consoles and the PC, but you auto-target an enemy, and that's going to make things a lot easier because now you're going to automatically follow them around. This is great if you're using ranged, sorcery, or melee, and it's going to really help you out no matter what. Now, if you're doing a sorcery or a ranged build, do make sure you have a few sort of melee skills there and a few melee weapons you can turn to in times of need, because those times are going to occur. You're going to run out of potions, you're going to run out of arrows, you're going to just decide that a bow's lame or whatever it is, and you're going to want to do a little bit of melee damage. So it's good to have a little bit of strength and a little bit of HP, because that always goes a ways. So what I'd recommend too, if you're new, don't really focus on that perfect build that someone put on YouTube that's going to do 1,000,000 sorcery damage, because it's sort of lame to play through the game when you can one-hit everything. And in general, it just doesn't give you the same experience as a well-leveled character does, at least for your first play. So now let's just get into some other general things about this game that you might not know, but you should know. So to kick things off, let's go over Sites of Grace. So Sites of Grace are basically save points where you can do a bunch of other cool stuff. So one of the things you can do at a Site of Grace is you can sit down and you can sleep. You can basically do it until morning, afternoon, or night. I wish it worked that way in real life. Unfortunately, it doesn't. So if you do wake up at night, the stuff is going to be a little bit harder. It's going to be a little bit tougher, but you're going to get more runes. Runes are what you get when you kill something, by the way. So also at a Site of Grace, once you found 3 of them, you're going to meet a special character. Again, no spoilers. That character is going to give you the ability to level up. You can go to a Site of Grace to level up. The way you level up is you use runes to level up. Do keep in mind, though, that as you add more and more statuses, or as you level up more and more skills, it's going to be harder and harder, costlier and costlier to get the next level. This is generally how games work, and Elden Ring is no different. Also at the Site of Grace, you can change your flask allocation. So the way that flask allocation works is that you can use golden seeds to get more flasks, And you can also upgrade the amount of healing that those flasks do by using sacred tears. So what you want to do anytime you find a golden seed or a sacred tear is use it to level up your flasks. And finally, you can also allocate flasks, which means you can choose how many flasks are going to give you HP and how many will give you FP. So make sure you do this before any big battles, because different situations are going to call for different flask allocations. And that's basically what you can do at a Site of Grace. There's additional things, but I'm not going to get into that now because we just don't really have the time for that. So next up, let's talk about runes. Runes are basically what drives Elden Ring. It's what you use to level up, it's what you use to buy things at merchants, and it's basically the thing that you use to do everything. The way runes work is you get runes for killing enemies. Bosses are going to give you more than basic enemies, and harder enemies are going to give you more than less hard enemies. If you happen to die, you lose all of the runes that you're holding, but do not fear, because you have one opportunity, one chance, one shot to get them back. And that's going to be get to those runes before you die again. If you die again, all is lost, those runes are gone, and tough luck. But if you get back those runes, they're generally going to be 100% of what you lost. If you die around certain locations, you might not get 100% of your runes back. You might get a slightly degraded amount back, and that's all I'm going to say about that. But basically, when it comes to runes, it's a use it or lose it policy. In addition, you can also find runes throughout the map. These are going to be golden runes. You get some of them just by destroying those skulls that are like glowy. So if you ever find a skull that glows in the dark, you want to break that, and you're going to be able to get usually runes out of it. And these runes are going to go into your inventory rather than into your sort of like rune bank account, if you will, the bank account that you lose anytime you die. So when they're sitting in your inventory, you actually don't lose those. You don't lose anything from your inventory if you die. So the nice thing here is you can just keep those on hand for whenever you need it. So if you're saving up for a big purchase, that's what you're going to want to do. Level up with the runes that you get from killing enemies, save up those runes that you can collect from the ground. You're not going to lose those when you die. Then you take those runes, you go to a merchant, and you can buy whatever you want to buy. Now, when it comes to buying, one of the first things you should buy is a crafting kit. That's going to really help you out. That's also how you do multiplayer. I've got a guide on that you can go to see that. But yeah, crafting kits, you definitely want to buy that from merchants. And while we're on merchants, don't make the mistake of attacking NPCs. You can attack any NPC that you want throughout the map. Unfortunately, if you attack an NPC, they're not going to be friendly to you. Just like in real life, if you go after your friend with the sword, they're generally not going to want to be friends ever again. And it works the same way in Elden Rings. So what do you have to do? You've got to actually kill that NPC, then you get a little token from that NPC, and you can take it to a space that we're not going to talk about to basically get all the items that that NPC was supposed to sell you. And you're not going to get them for free. You've still got to pay for them, by the way. So don't attack an NPC unless you're sure that you can kill that NPC, and then you can take things to the next level if you're not role-playing a nice character, and just get all of your stuff from one specific spot. So that's sort of a nice little hack if you didn't know about that, but it's also like, it feels a little shady to me. Anyways, let's go over easy mode. So there is an easy mode in Elden Rings, sort of. And the way this works is you can actually summon creatures. I talked about this earlier, but the way it works, you get a little bell. You get that after you do a specific amount of things. There's another video on that. There's a million videos on that. Look it up if you're interested. You ring this bell, and it's going to allow you to summon other creatures. When you summon these creatures, they're basically your best friends, and they're going to do your bidding, which is generally attack a boss mob. You can only summon these creatures when this little symbol is showing on your screen. If the symbol's not showing, you can't summon creatures. Generally, though, for boss fights, you can summon creatures, so this is something you want to take advantage of. Some more advanced players might consider this to be cheating or taking the easy way out, but honestly, just do it. If it's the easiest way for you to get off a boss, it's the way that I take. So yeah, if you want to kill a boss fast, just use summons. It's going to make things a lot easier. Also, usually bosses have a companion that you can summon, especially like main storyline bosses. There's a companion you can summon, usually right next to the boss portals. Take advantage of those companions if you can. People have guides on this. There's a ton of resources. Go look it up on YouTube. In fact, some of those videos might be mine. And you know, if you hit the subscribe button right now, you're more likely to actually see my videos when you run into questions. So if you've made it this far and you like the way I explain things, you probably do want to hit subscribe, just because that's going to help you out and it's going to help me out. And that's all I've got for today. That's basically the beginner's guide to Elden Ring. There's a lot of stuff that I skipped. There's a lot of stuff that I might have missed. But the reason for that is because I didn't want to make a sort of 2-hour-long documentary on everything in Elden Rings. This is just meant to be a beginner's guide to get you into the game. One parting word of advice before I send you on your adventure is this. Elden Ring is a game all about exploration. They're not going to hold your hand. They're not going to tell you where anything is. So it's up to you to find everything. What you want to do is you don't want to just follow the main story. You want to go down every little path that intrigues you. You want to test every little door that you can find. And you want to find all the cool things you can on your own. Don't watch guides that are going to tell you how to get to endgame fast, because that's just going to ruin the game for it. The experience is all about the journey. And what you want to do is you want to have the most epic journey possible. Don't rush bosses, because it's just going to make the game harder for you. If you're trying to do some sort of Elden Rings in 2 minutes sort of speed run, yeah, go for it, of course. But if you want to actually experience the game the way it's probably meant to be experienced, journey throughout the lands, take on mobs that you find, take on bosses, take on things that you find that are off the beaten path. It's going to level you up. It's going to get you some skills. And then when you do decide to do main quests, it's going to be a lot easier. Don't rush this one. Elden Ring is an amazing game. So take your time with it. Take your time exploring, looking around. There really isn't that much of a story to be forgotten. Just enjoy the journey. See what's around every corner. And as you go, you're going to naturally skill up. And as you skill up, it's going to be easier and easier for you to take on those main storyline bosses. So if you ever get to a point and you're just having the most difficult time ever, don't try and fight that boss again and again. Go out, find something cool, go on an adventure, and then come back. You'll be better off for it, and it's going to be a lot easier. Anyways, that's the beginner's guide to Elden Ring. Hopefully it helped you. If it did, I'd always appreciate a like. But I just appreciate the fact you made it this far. Thanks.